getting us started today, we're going to, Dustin, what do we want to talk about first? Editors versus IDEs?
I think so. We can talk about the Holy Wars.
The Holy Wars.
The Holy Wars, yes.
So, editors versus IDEs. Let me take a look.
So
Brian,
I think to kind of get everybody started here, editors versus IDEs. We like to talk about the tools of the trade. So something that we are very passionate about here is, being very efficient with the way that you do your work, making sure that you're able to do the job as you see fit with whatever tool you can use. So you'll hear that people get very, very religious when it comes to the tools that they use, and that everybody must subscribe to the same, policy and use the exact same tools all the time. But we kind of take a different approach. So when we're talking about IDEs, the first thing that you need to know is that it's an integrated development environment. That's what IDE stands for. It's just an acronym. And when we're talking about editors, it's, your normal text editors, whether that's Notepad, whether that's, talking about like Sublime Text or Atom, I think is another good example.
Yep.
Yeah, integrated.
VS Code's kind of erring more and more on the side of like, it's in this middle ground. So.
Yeah, base VS Code is probably an editor, but Atom's kind of similar in that aspect too, because you can just start adding so many plugins on it that it eventually becomes more like an IDE.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, everybody that's here this morning, feel free to jump in the chat. Let us know what you guys use. What editors, what IDEs do you guys use for your normal development? Yeah,
it's always interesting. Every session we run these, we always get to see what people are using, what the new thing is that we haven't heard about. I will say again, we're all about being efficient with the tools you use. And so we have our own set of tools that we use that we're efficient with our day to day. And it's sometimes not really necessary to go and step outside of your normal day to day of tool sets. Now, with that being said, I think there's some things we'll talk about here in a moment to push you guys a little bit outside of your comfort zone with your IDE or editor that you're using. So yeah, Dustin, do you want to talk a little bit about editors and why we have some preference to those initially, at least?
Yeah. So again, the first thing to note is that, whatever tool you're learning, make sure that you at least know the best way to, like I said, be efficient, know the keyboard shortcuts, at least the ones that, get you around and are most utilized when you're actually doing development or working through stuff. You got to be careful with custom shortcuts as well, because they don't necessarily travel as well into different environments. One of the things
that's definitely a good pre-COVID or post-COVID note there is if you're going and you're in the office and you're having a problem and you've gone and customized your IDE to all the extent it's perfect to every shortcut, you can do everything via the keyboard, and then you ask for your coworker to come over, your teammate to come over, and hey, I need some help with this, and you're like, hey, here, can you try for me? And they go get on there, and then they start deleting files and doing all these other things because the shortcuts aren't the same. Yep. So we typically recommend that you keep the shortcuts the same for that reason, so that way it's universal. You can get other people to come help. Certainly some customization's not bad, but overwriting the defaults we try to stay away from.
Yeah, I see Dominic in here using Emacs. Very nice, very nice. Like to see that.
Brian would be I can hear Brian
it's like yeah
Brian's the only Emacs user around here.
So talking about editors specifically, Emacs is a great one to learn and know. VI is another one that's often, again, when we talk about Holy Wars, it's usually VI versus Emacs when it comes to editors.
Or Vim.
Or Vim, if you're using
VI or Vim is
if you're using the extended.
Interchangeable.
Yeah. We tend to push VI a little bit more than Emacs these days, just because that becomes the default Unix editor on most Unix systems. Emacs isn't always installed by default, so if you're looking for Emacs and it's not there, then it's good to have kind of a fallback into a VI editor at that point.
Yeah, and I think I need to make some more notes in here. I have transitioned to what Dustin would consider the dark side. I've done plenty of Windows development at this point, whereas Dustin's doing a lot of his work on Linux, and I've done plenty there as well. And depending on your environment you're working on, we really encourage you understanding and knowing how to use the tools that are available to you there, because you don't know when you log into primarily a server, if you're working on like a Linux server, when you log in, you're only going to have your shell.
First and foremost, no GUI.
Yeah, there's going to be no
desktop.
GUI, so you're going to be able to use the command line. So that's why we talk about command line a lot, and what we'll get into a little bit more in the advanced Linux module. But having familiarity with the core functionality. You don't have to use VI or Vim every day, but if you're working on Linux or your servers that you're deploying to are on Linux, knowing VI and how to open a file, save a file, quit out of the file.
Quit. That's the important one.
Save and quit, and also
quit without saving.
Quit without saving, yes.
Get out, get out, get out.
Yes, you've made a mistake and you want to back out of that.
Hey, I see Elijah's on this morning.
Yeah, he's Stone and Chisel. Yes, Elijah.
Oh, code reviews are hard that way.
I see Nano in the chat there too. That actually brings up a good point. I think someone's made mention of it, that in some future version of Linux in Ubuntu or CentOS, I'm not sure which one, they're changing the default editor to Nano.
Yeah.
So if that happens and that rolls out for a while, we'll probably suggest that you know both, because in our environment, in
depending
the
on which flavor.
Yep. In the enterprise, a lot of organizations are going to keep older versions because they're stable and that they're still getting security updates. So something like a CentOS 7 or a Red Hat 7 is very common on the enterprise side of things. And that's going to be VI for a while. You're going to be deploying to those servers. Once this starts to roll out, you might need to know Nano and VI. That way you can log in and Elijah already Fedora. I think the latest version of Fedora changes it to Nano. So the next couple of versions of CentOS. We still have a little bit of time. Now, with that being said, talking about efficiency, this is a really key point that we didn't talk too much about in here previously, but we've expanded again in the world of Windows. I think this is important to talk about if you're doing like .NET development, is there's the difference between efficiency and knowing what's available to you. In that, in the Windows ecosystem, I've really encouraged our developers to all learn Visual Studio, proper Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code, if they're doing .NET development, because that's what the industry uses. So this is kind of, hey, learn what everybody else is learning to at least know how to get around with it. I personally use a different editor for my .NET development. I use something called Rider because I find it more efficient for my use cases for the work that I'm doing. But I still know how to get into Visual Studio. So the key point here too is in the .NET ecosystem, unfortunately, this is the sort of asterisk on it, and Dustin's going to cringe a little bit, is that you do unfortunately have to use an IDE for a lot of legacy development. Newer applications, you can use just the command line. And that's where we start to recommend, like, hey, understanding the underlying build tools in Java or Ruby or Go or whatever the languages that you're building and you can build on a Linux ecosystem. Get familiar with how the build system works underneath. Whether it be like a Maven or a Gradle. I don't know what the build tools for any of those other languages are. I don't do those, unfortunately.
I mean, Python and Ruby, it's the read eval print loop. So it's just the Python command runs the Python code, for example. But if you're using like a server or something like Django for Python, it gets a little different. I think the big thing too is if you're using an IDE, it's good to start out using an IDE if you don't necessarily know what it's doing every single time, but learn those things. Those are the things that are important, because if you get into the habit of using your IDE for everything and you don't know what it's doing, that starts to become, your ball and chain that you have to drag around everywhere for yourself. Knowing exactly when you click that run button, what that is actually doing in your IDE is very helpful when you move into like a server environment. Where
or
you
DevOps or automation
just automating in general. That it really helps you understand exactly what that thing is doing, so then you can go and change and use those same practices or use those same commands that it's using in a different way. Whether that's automation with continuous integration, doing continuous deployments, or whether that's troubleshooting on a server somewhere and having to run some sort of debugging or some sort of build in a server environment.
You definitely want to know the underlying process there, and that.
I've seen too many, I'll say, high-level engineers that are very stuck in their ways and just know that the green button in Eclipse for Java development is what runs the code, and it's like that's not the only way you can do it. that's really, you know, running Maven or Gradle under the scenes and doing a whole other slew of things. If you know what you're doing, you can change that configuration very easily.
Yeah, that gets into a whole other chain of, I think we talked about this in build automation and build tools, and how that works, and using something that's universal across editors or IDEs. But I think the most important thing to take away here is know what the tools available to you on the system.
Yep.
On the Linux side of things, it's VI, possibly if you're using newer operating systems as server OSs, maybe Nano, but definitely VI. I don't see the VI going away in the next 10 years, probably, from at least the default, or where you have to log into the server and know how to use it in some capacity.
Well, again, with I thank Elijah for shouting out Fedora, because I think that's the one that's switching, but that is the like super bleeding edge Red Hat version of Linux. And so that means to me that CentOS being the stable other side of that, 5 to 10 years. Yeah, it's going to be a long time before CentOS actually gets those upgrades to where Nano is the default. So that still means you have to know VI before, you know, Nano takes over in that regard for that specific example. So just because Fedora is doing it, they're, you know, experimenting with it there. It still has to go through their entire life cycle of moving it into, you know, Red Hat, and then moving it into CentOS, and then getting that working.
On the Windows side of things, I think it's pretty easy to use Notepad. I think everybody can attest to that. They can open a file with Notepad. So it's a little bit different when you do have the GUI there, and most Windows environments have some sort of user interface, for better or for worse. So a little bit different there. So know the underlying editor, and make sure you're comfortable with that. We actually, Elijah or Max, if you guys could post into the chat for me the link to Over the Wire, talking about getting familiar with the command line and the tools that are available to you there. We always recommend that everybody runs through the first 10 levels of Bandit on Over the Wire. And the whole purpose of that is to get familiar with the command line, get familiar with the tools you have available to you. Using VI to open up files and close them, or using other tools. I'm not going to give away too many of the answers there, but
let's see. I think I found it quickly, so I can do that as well. Haha. There we go. So one last note I'll say for editors versus IDEs. And again, if you guys have questions out there, feel free to post them. We'll answer them as quickly as they come in. But one other thing is, you know, how often when you're developing are you switching between your keyboard and your mouse? It's a very small and subtle thing, but it's something that the more time that you can have your hands, both of your hands on your keyboard typing, the faster and more efficient you will be as well. So just something as simple as improving your keyboarding skills and understanding the shortcuts.
Well, I hope that everyone in the stream today knows the what Control-C or Command-C if you're on Mac, and Control-V do. And if you don't, please learn those.
You mean I can't just right click on my mouse and copy, and then right click and paste? And
I don't know what happened with your chat there, Dustin. I see it on.
Did it not go? I don't know. Hopefully.
Yeah. Let us know if you guys don't see the chat to Over the Wire. It seems like YouTube chat is messing up again.
I can post it a second time as well. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, so yeah, keyboarding in general is just a lot easier. And the more that you can keep your hands on the keyboard using shortcuts to do normal operations that you would with your mouse. For example, one of the things that I took on learning outside of work in VI specifically was learning how to copy large swaths of code and paste it using the visual mode, so that I don't have to go over to my mouse, you know, drag and click to select a large couple lines of text and then copy them. Yeah. Things like that.
Shortcuts, learn the basic ones. Control X, Matthew mentioned there. Yes, that's you got to look that one up as well.
Yep.
And so I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Kofi. What's IDEs again? So IDE is just integrated development environment. Mm-hmm. So the big difference between that and an editor is all the surrounding tooling to go and automate and make things faster for your development process. So, don't get us wrong in that. You definitely knowing an IDE can make your efficiency go really high, but you don't need an IDE to be efficient.
Yes.
You can do all the same things on the command line if you get comfortable with it.
There's pros and cons to both.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
editors are generally open a file, save a file.
Yep.
Very
maybe
basic
a file
commands.
browser, something like an Atom or Sublime or
search and replace.
Yep.
Your IDE is going to be integrated into your build environment, your I'll say test framework, potentially into your source control management solution. If you're using Git, for example,
I haven't found an IDE that I've liked anything except for the command line that the command line Git is.
If you are using SVN still, I've known that the plugins and tools for SVN has been pretty good over the years in terms of IDEs. But yeah, Git seems to be the easiest at command line these days. So there hasn't been a one single good set of tools for Git in IDE that I found either. It becomes very hard.
Yeah.
And again, if you guys know them, feel free to shout them out because we'd love to explore.
Yep.
We're always looking to improve our process too.